first of all, we see that the Lord is with him. So the Lord is recognized in him, and he succeeds. So success follows him around. And not unsurprisingly, the master wants some of this. He's like, wow, if I entrust to this guy, everything he touches seems to get better, I'll entrust some more to him. He's faithful in small things, well, entrust him with big things. So again, things in the New Testament sort of taking shape in the life of someone in the Old Testament. So he finds himself in a position of authority, and everything he touches, everything in his care, my version says, so he left in Joseph's care everything. He didn't make Joseph work everything. He asked him to care for everything, which is interesting looking back at the Genesis passage. And basically, we see that he prospers and everything around him prospers, which is this concept of prosperity coming in, that there is a sort of a blessing comes. Some versions may use the word a blessing. So prosperity and blessing are kind of the same thing. There's a blessing that comes to Potiphar's household. And if you find yourself working in an organisation that is not run by Christians, don't think that you can't have a witness. Yes, you can have a different type of perhaps more significant witness if you lead an organisation. But just being in an organisation, if you do it as working for the Lord and use your gifts, there is the beginning there of a powerful witness. And part of what's happening here in this story is Joseph is sort of colonising, if you like, or taking over the world of the heathen man who's got the power. So the power begins in the hands of the heathen. It's Potiphar who has all the wealth. But actually Joseph comes in and takes a key role in that and starts to become part of that world. So Joseph's gift of administration is recognised and cannot be stopped, even as a slave. So there's no excuses. If you've got a gift, don't whinge about where you are today and think, I'll use my gift when I'm leading the company. If you don't start today, you'll never do it. And there's no excuses. It begins today. So nothing can kind of repress the gifts of God. Then what we see is when he goes into jail, what's fascinating is that when he's in jail, exactly the same thing happens again. So we know that Potiphar's wife accuses him. Potiphar's angry, throws him in jail. He's a slave at the end of the day. He doesn't have any access to the justice system. There's no court case here. He just goes to jail. But in jail, we find that in no time at all, the jailer has put him in charge of the jail. This man's gift cannot be held down. If being a slave was bad, being a slave in prison must have been really bad. But even so, his gift rises up, and within no time, Joseph's in charge of the prison. He's not free, but the bottom line is the prison jailer puts him in charge of everything, and similar to Potiphar, doesn't worry about anything. Joseph's looking after everything. And in that context of being the person who cares for the prison and takes it as a privilege and responsibility and thrives in it, not only would Joseph have found some hope and some purpose, even in a very difficult situation, which is good for him, but we see that these two, in his world, powerful people, now they may not have been kings, but they were working for the king, which meant they were powerful people, the cupbearer and the baker, they have a dream. And here we see that first example of Joseph's spiritual gift of interpretation coming into the story. And we know that the interpretation of those dreams is what eventually led to Joseph being in Pharaoh's presence and led to him becoming the person we know that he's famous for. But something very interesting happens in that encounter, because Joseph still had lessons to learn. You see, we know that Joseph was quite likely a fairly arrogant young man. You know, his brothers may have been offended by his dreams anyway, but they were probably more offended by his dreams because he rubbed their noses in it. So it's highly likely that Joseph was not an entirely pleasant, spoilt young man. We know he was spoilt, and we know that young men who are spoilt and have dreams of grandeur are not entirely pleasant to be around. And I don't think Joseph was that different. So Joseph was a gifted individual, but he also was probably struggling a bit with the arrogance that comes from being gifted and young. And that would not be entirely unsurprising. And we see here that God does something very, very important that he has to go through before he can be released into a position of influence and authority. He has to learn humility. So when he interprets the cupbearer's dreams, look at what he says here. So in chapter 40, verse 8, chapter 40, verse 8, we both had dreams, they answered, but there is no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Now, I may be being a little bit fussy here, but you'll see why I think I'm right in what I'm saying now. Joseph says, interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dream. Interpret that a different way. I'm God. Yeah? He doesn't say, tell me your dreams, I'll go and pray about it, I'll seek my God's word on it, and when my God tells me something, I'll tell you. He says, tell me your... Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream. I'm God. I may be a slave, but I'm God. Or at least he thinks... It kind of suggests a level of grandeur. Well, the other reason I think that may be the case, and God doesn't like arrogance, he likes humility, particularly to people he's about to entrust power to. It's absolutely essential, if you're going to have power, that you have a humility. And what happens next? He spends another 2 years in jail. The cupbearer forgets all about him. And why? Because he needed to spend another 2 years in jail learning some humility. So 2 years later, finally, when it's God's timing, he gets the phone call, get dressed, shave, get into the presence of Pharaoh. Pharaoh's had a dream. He's very troubled by it. No one can answer this dream. And we remembered all of a sudden there's a guy in the jail who seems to be able to interpret dreams. So when the cup... And it says here, so Pharaoh's dreams... And I don't know if this is going to say what I think it's going to say, so let's have a quick look. He's telling his dreams, and he's looking for wise and discerning people. And then the cupbearer, where is it? He says something along the lines of... so the cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servant, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as the interpretation." There's no mention made of God. There's no mention made of the Lord. You know, if this had been like with Potiphar, they would have said, not that there was a man in jail who was from the captain of the guard's house. They would have said, there was a man in jail who was a man of the Lord, and he could interpret dreams because he understood God's ways or something. There's no mention made of God. Joseph's witness, if you like, at that point was zero. There was no acknowledgement of God, and they had he had got glory. He's a hero. God is nowhere to be seen in this story at this moment. So in Potiphar's house, God is glorified. Here's a man in whom I see the Lord, and I want some of that in my household. Now we see no mention of the Lord. So, Joseph, has he learnt his lesson? Is there going to be a difference when we get to his approaching Pharaoh? Okay? Now, I think you'll find there is, because otherwise I think he'd have gone back into jail for another 2 years until he'd learnt his lesson. So, we then find that Joseph is summoned, and we're in chapter 41 now. And Pharaoh summons Joseph, and let's see what Joseph says. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, this is verse 15, "I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And look what he says, "I cannot do it." Wow. "I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." He's distinguishing between himself and God now. Yeah. That's profound. Yeah. This is a man who's understood now. It's not... Because I think when we're gifted, we can start to think that it's us who's gifted. We forget the source of the gift. Yeah. You know, how many people who are... Being gifted is not something that only Christians have. Everyone in the world is gifted. God is generous. The difference is, most people in the world go, "Aren't I great? Wow, give me the praise, aren't I a superstar? Let me have the gold medal, let me have the top job, pay me the big salary, put me on the tennis court and look, watch, I'll win. And aren't I great? Take pictures of me, put me in the newspapers, big me up, make me into a superstar." The difference here is he says, absolutely essentially, before he even begins to demonstrate the use of his gift, this is God's gift, but I will happily put it at your service. So he then listens to the dream, and he hears the great dream of the cows coming up out of the Nile, and the fact that the dream had been repeated in a different form with the crops. And Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. And so he interprets the dream. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. And he sets out that there are going to be 7 years of great abundance. And then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And he sets out that the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God and that God will do it soon. So this is that gift of interpretation. Joseph's gift of interpretation is powerfully used here to accurately and precisely interpret a dream and set out 14 years of what's about to happen in the world. And that's quite a bold thing to do, because you could be proved wrong in year 1 when the crops fail. So it's pretty bold to be an interpreter of dreams, to be a prophet. But here's really interesting. You see, that is that gift finished with. That gift finished by interpreting the dream. There's nothing more to interpret here. Now he moves into his other gift, his really dominant gift. Immediately he hears about the future. Anyone who's in business and entrepreneurial instantly gets a business plan. So that gift of administration, when it hears about the future, you imagine someone says to you, right, in 3 years' time, the value of land in Lesotho is going to triple. Well, what do? You scrape every penny you can get together and you buy land. That's assuming you believe in the vision. You believe in the interpretation. Okay, so if you knew that was about to happen, anyone, you imagine an entrepreneur is going to be on that immediately. Wow, 3 years from now, land's doubling, I'm buying land. Well, that same gift in Joseph instantly gets a business plan. So no sooner has he finished the interpretation, he moves beyond the interpretation into what action you should take as a response. That's not interpretation, that's planning. It's a different gift. The interpreter of dreams could not go into that territory. That's the end of the interpretation. That's what the dream says. And then immediately in verse 30 he says, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. That's a very clear strategy. So he knows what's coming, and he has a strategy that directly takes that prophecy and turns it into a kind of business plan of how to make use of that 7 years of harvest in order to provide for the 7 years of famine. And he's clearly good at business planning, because people like Pharaoh would have been used to seeing business plans. They would have had people bringing strategies to them about how to run the kingdom all the time. And Pharaoh and his advisors instantly say, this seems like a good plan. So he has an endorsement there. These are knowledgeable people when it comes to business planning, and they recognise this is a good business plan. He's in the dragon's den, and these guys are going to invest. They're going to invest in not just his plan, they're going to invest in him. And what they say to him is, and this is one of the greatest moments in any business person, in any kingdom business career, this is the greatest moment. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? God is recognised again in Joseph's life. Why? Primarily because he acknowledged that it was God who interprets dreams. He acknowledged that his giftedness was not him, his giftedness was God. So now, all of a sudden, there's a witness again. It's very simple. If we don't make it known to the people around us, our clients, our customers, the people who buy from us, the people who work alongside us, that we are believers and that what we do is inspired by the Bible and by the Spirit of God and the gifts we have come from him, then don't expect to have any kind of witness and don't expect to have any kind of ministry. So Joseph demonstrates here this absolutely essential gateway. Now, there is this gateway which is basically acknowledging. And I can't even hope to spell acknowledging, so I'll scribble. So he acknowledges that God is the source of his gifts. And immediately he does that, in comes witness. They see the Spirit of God in him, and they say, we want some of this. So they put Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace. All my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Wow! That is the ultimate promotion in history. But it's actually not the first time this has happened. He's been from being a slave to in charge of a whole household only a few years before. There's a repetition coming here. Joseph's already tasted this and seen God's hand. and God does it again, but on a bigger scale. He who's faithful in the small things can be entrusted with great things. The New Testament is fulfilled in the Old Testament again. So Joseph is now raised up. God has gained glory from this, and people are recognizing that there's a man of God in their midst, and what they see happen from then on, they can attribute to God. So that is 14 years of powerful witness coming up. And when we turn to the end of the story, we will see how Joseph reflects on it.